Oh, there's other people here, so that's good. Yeah. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi, Joe. How's it going?
It's going really well. I wanted to know if you could help me. What do you see on your screen? Do you see just the picture? Or do you see a picture with next slide and notes?
I just see a picture of a man, I guess.
Yeah. How about that? Now you just see the College of New Caledonia?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks so much for your help. I appreciate it. I think we're going to get started here in about 14 minutes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Just okay. Good. Oh, hang on here. Just open the workbook. Redoing.
No. Zero. Oh, your food smells.
Welcome to everyone who's joined us. We're going to get rolling here in about 6 minutes. Thanks for joining early. Yeah, really excited to be here, and well, 5 minutes now. So I'll just stay on mute and wait for organizers to jump on board and get us going. Thanks again for joining.
Oh, this is Ash, by the way.
Oh,
Nice to meet you. Oh, how's it, Lisa?
I figured it
Oh,
out.
I
Did
thought I
you?
was like, I'm like,
Yeah.
Perfect, okay.
Yeah, I did.
So everything is working now?
Yeah, but it was kind of confusing that you guys don't have any instruction sheet on here, so.
We don't, yeah. Right, looks like, yeah, you guys are already in the call.
Am I muted?
No, you can.
So good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Diane Van Bakel. I'm the HR advisor in payroll here at CNC. And I'm going to do just a little introduction for Joe. So Jane, if you're on there, are you good to go in the DDI room? Is everything up and running? No response. So we're just about 1 minute before 1 o'clock. So I'll just give it a couple more minutes in case there's some last minute folks signing on, and then we'll get going, Joe.
Sounds great.
She's giving a
Says good to
thumbs
go.
up.
Yes. Oh, perfect. Okay, so we are 2 o'clock, so we will get started. So I would like to just first say that the College of New Caledonia is honored to work with our Indigenous communities of this region, inclusive of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge the graciousness of the 22 First Nations in welcoming those who are seeking knowledge to their traditional territories. So I'm here to introduce our speaker for today. Our next virtual presenter has an honorary doctorate from Laurentian University, is the winner of the Courage to Come Back Award, and was recently awarded the Meritorious Service Medal from the Governor General of Canada. Joe's life, however, wasn't always this good. In fact, 25 years ago, he pushed a shopping cart in Vancouver's notorious downtown East Side as a homeless addict. Joe's story is one of perseverance, determination, and the resiliency of the human spirit. He is a living testament to the idea that anything is possible. A copy of Joe's book will be sent to all of our attendees today, or after the session, you're more than welcome to pop by HR and pick up a copy. So ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome the Skid Row CEO, Joe Roberts. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks, Diane. Thank you so much. It's really great to be here. For me, it's good to be anywhere. You know, I was I have to tell you a funny story. I was getting dressed to be on camera today. I'm in White Rock, British Columbia, and I passed by a mirror and I looked at myself in the fancy clothes, and I thought, in the 1980s, when I was dressed this well, it was usually preceded by the phrase, "Will the defendant please rise?" So for a guy like me, it's good to be anywhere. I do have I do have a dark sense of humor, and sometimes it gets me into trouble. I was the kind of student, especially in elementary school and in high school, that was kind of the class clown, I guess would be the best description. And I think, I learned later in life what this was, is when I was a little boy and I was uncomfortable, I used humor to deflect feelings of being uncomfortable. So anytime I'm uncomfortable, I'm cracking jokes. Now, about 2 years ago, I was crossing into the American border. I live in White Rock and I fly all over the US and I go to different conferences down there, and I pull up to the border and I get nervous in those situations, even though I have nothing to be nervous about. But I get up to the border in my car, and there's a guy at the border patrol, and he's this really big guy, real muscular guy, no neck, one eyebrow, real mean scowl, but he had a name tag that said Bert. So I opened the conversation with, "Hey, Bert," which I thought was really funny, but Bert didn't find it too funny, and we ended up going to the little room together. But anyways, I had another story where I was speaking at the Ontario Provincial Police, this huge event. I had about 250 of the top police in all of Ontario looking at me all at once. And I was sitting at this head table, and I had the commissioner of the OPP on one side and the lieutenant governor of Ontario. And the waiter says to me, "Would you like a drink?" And, I should have just said, "No, thank you." Instead, I said, "I can't." And the waiter said, "Well, why can't you have a drink?" And I said, "Well," now I didn't want to tell them my life story. And so I come up with a little lie. I said, "Well, I can't have a drink because I'm allergic to alcohol." And the waiter says, "Well, what happens? What kind of reaction do you have when you drink?" And I said, "I break out in handcuffs." And, it was funny to me. And I looked over, and the commissioner, he thought it was really funny too. But I don't know if the lieutenant governor didn't think it was funny or didn't get the joke. But that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It's really great to be here today. And one of the reasons why I always open with a couple of corny jokes is that I believe that humor is one of the greatest weapons that we can take to adversity, challenge, and change. And I don't know about you, the last couple of years have been really hard. It's been hard on a lot of people. Stress, burnout, it's at its all-time high. People are struggling with mental health. People are just having a hard go. And it seems like we've been assaulted. Our senses have been assaulted, and the world seems to have closed in around us. It's more difficult to do the work that we were tasked to do 2 years ago. And I think that humor is one of the things that shifts the way we look at the world. And it gives it new meaning. To me, laughter is audible hope. And I believe it's one of the biggest things that's been missing in the last couple of years. I used to run my company, and I'd leave the office door open. And when I heard laughter, I knew that our culture was safe, that we were doing well. Humor has the power to change the way we see the world. And I think that more than ever, we need to find the funny again. And for me, this is important because for so many years in my life, there wasn't anything to laugh at. This was a picture of me in 1989. I pushed a shopping cart in Vancouver's downtown east side. I struggled with mental health. I struggled with substance use disorder. I was chronically homeless. And I was desperately trying to find a bigger part of myself. And I want to just sort of dispel with this notion that, I'm all that in a bag of chips. Diane read a really nice bio introduction of me, but I'm here today because of over 10,000 people. I'm here today because of educators. I'm here today because of social workers. I'm here today because of a mom that wouldn't give up on me. I didn't pull my socks up and get on with it. I'm here today because of community, people who supported me when I was at my most vulnerable place in life so that I could find my possibility. Possibility is one of my favorite words in the English lexicon. And it's this word that means to me hope. It means something beyond where we are right now as individuals or as a society. Possibility is what great entrepreneurs move towards. In fact, all disruptive technologies over the last decade have been possibility mindsetters. People that looked at the world differently, didn't just accept that what was today is going to be tomorrow. See, probability is the opposite of possibility. Probability is the prediction of patterns. As human beings, we're very good at predicting patterns, necessary for knowing when the fruit's going to be ripe or when the salmon's coming upstream. It's good to know when the seasons are going to change. Probability is good for predicting what's coming next, but it's devoid of innovation, creativity, and to some degree, hope. Possibility is what great fathers, great mothers, great grandparents, great coaches, great managers help people discover for themselves. Right? All the people that I've ever admired in my life, you know, Dr. Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, right? A one-legged boy from Coquitlam named Terry Fox. These were people who thought, lived, breathed, and slept a possibility mindset. Possibility is that feeling I had when my daughter was born and I held her in my arms, and in front of her was nothing but, you know, the unwritten pages that would become the chapters of her book of life. The interesting thing is possibility never goes away. In 1989, it was hard to see my possibility, but it was there. And I think one of the greatest things that we can invest in is possibility, right? We invest in it with our children, we invest in ourselves. It's a thing that may not be present right now, but could be with some work. Now, my story didn't start in the downtown east side. My story began in a little town called Midland, Ontario, but an hour and a half north of Toronto. I had this awesome family growing up. You know, I had this dad who was this larger than life guy. He was funny and gregarious. He loved being a dad. I had a mom who was a stay-at-home mom. I had an older brother and a younger sister and a magic dog named Angus who could hear you unwrap a cheese wrapper from 3 blocks away. You know, that kind of dog when you open the fridge and the dog was right there. My first 8 years of my life were perfect. They were absolutely phenomenal. You know, and my dad was the kind of guy who used to say things to me like, I love you, you can do and be anything. You know, both my parents, they spoke possibility into our lives. And I felt safe and protected. In 1975, unfortunately, my father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And just like that, our life and trajectory changed. We fell below the poverty line. It's not that, you know, my mom could have gone to university or college and got an education and gone out and had a job, but she just wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. But now all of a sudden with dad gone, we had economic insecurity, and she had 3 kids to raise, ages 5, 8, and 11. And I remember feeling that fear and anxiety at a very young age coming off my mom. Because literally overnight, we lost our dad, she lost her economic security, and we lost any semblance of normal. Right. And so my mom did what she thought was her best solution, and she remarried really quick. And I don't fault her for that, given, you know, the set of circumstances. I would have been terrified to be in her shoes, having that much responsibility with no income. The problem is that the man who came into the house next wasn't anything like my father. He was a violent, abusive alcoholic. And so I went from a dad who would say things like, I love you, you can be and do anything, to a man who would say things like, you're stupid, you're dumb, and you'll never amount to anything. And I was 8 years old, and I took that on. You know, the thing that I know today as a youth advocate is that if you can get a kid to believe a lie about who they are, you can hide some of their possibility from them. By the time I was 8, 9, 10 years old, I was having some beginning problems with anxiety, social anxiety. My brother and his older friends were experimenting with drugs and asked me to join, and I joined. I didn't join because I was rebellious or curious about. I joined because I wanted to fit. I wanted to fit in. Yeah. And my brother and his older friend, I used to lie about this all the time too. I never told the truth about what drug I did. I used to say it was marijuana, but it wasn't. It was solvents. It was glue. They were sniffing glue. And I joined, and I got high for the first time, and I went home, and my stepfather came came into the house that night after a day of drinking, and he used to be loud and aggressive and intimidating. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. You know, the drugs protected me from the emotional uncertainty that was my life. And it was a place that I ran to for the next 15 years. You know, my friend Gabor Mate talks about early childhood trauma. I had lost my dad and didn't deal with the grief. And then I had the ongoing physical, mental, and emotional abuse from my stepfather. And I found this thing that somehow kept me safe. I want to pause here just for a second, because over the last couple of years, many of us have had various different degrees of challenges and problems to deal with: stress and burnout and grief, anxiety. And it's really normal for us as human beings, when we feel those things, to reach out and not necessarily respond the best way. And it's really normal and natural to seek comfort in food, to seek comfort in alcohol, to seek comfort in recreational drugs, to seek comfort in escapism, right? This is what we do when we're faced with fear, anxiety, and uncertainty. Now, by the time I was growing out of those early years, I started to become very angry, and I started to push back at the world around me. I started to get in trouble at school. I started to become interactive with law enforcement in my community. At 15 years old, I got kicked out of the house. I couldn't get along with my stepfather anymore. At 16, I dropped out of school. At 17, I went to jail for the first time. You know, I remember I had one thing in my life that was going well by the time I was in my late teens. It was a relationship I had with this girl I had met in grade 10. You know, what was interesting about this relationship is this person knew who I was. You know, I could let my mask down in front of her and be vulnerable. But the problem is that my drug use and abuse was escalating. Along with that was bizarre behavior. And finally, one day she sat down and she said, "I believe in you. I really do. And I care for you deeply, but I'm not going the same place you are." And just like that, the relationship dissolved. And I remember feeling completely heartbroken and not knowing what to do. I decided to leave that town. By this time, I lived in a little place called Barrie, Ontario. And I decided I was going to go to Vancouver. And like so many statistical kids, the numbers are really high. Young people who leave their small communities and go to a larger community. That's what I did. I jumped on a bus and I headed out to Vancouver. And the reason I did is because Expo 86 was going on. And so I traveled 3.5 days across the country. And I remember I got off on the Greyhound bus. The Greyhound station back in those days used to be on Georgia Street. And I walked down to this little park, you know, right beside the expo site. In fact, when you stood in this park, you could see the whole site in front of you. And they had this big Canadian flag and this hockey stick. And I remember the sun coming up, and I remember feeling so aspirational. You know, little did I know that within a few short weeks, I'd actually be living in that park. You know, like so many young people who left that small community where I had extended family, I had access to people who cared about me. I had access to resources. I had a school that I could have gone back to. Now I was a small town kid in a big city. And I started to get into all kinds of trouble. I also had no oversight. You know, no one was really kind of looking out for me. And when I talked to my mom, I didn't really tell her what was going on. Within a few weeks, I was living in that park, and within a few weeks more, I was actually living under the bridge beside that park. And that bridge was the Georgia Viaduct, and that was my home off and on for the next several years. You know, I never intended to, and I never remember saying when I was in, grade 7 or 8 or 9, when I grow up, I want to, be addicted to drugs and be homeless, living in the streets of Vancouver, but that's what happened. 3 days before Christmas, 1989, I had one of the worst days of my life. It's also one of the best days of my life. I woke up and I was beginning to descend into withdrawal from opiates. And the only way I can describe that experience is it's like the worst flu you've ever had in your life, right? Withdrawal from whether it's heroin or fentanyl or oxy, it's kind of all the same thing, right? The withdrawal feels the same. It's like you get these hot flashes, cold flashes, you get achy bones, dry mouth, stomach that just turns, and then your anxiety level just creeps and creeps, and it just gets slowly and slowly darker and worse as the hours pass. And I was rocking back and forth in the pouring rain, wearing an old Mac jacket, you know, like those lumber jackets, they make them in green and red. Mine was green, and I was rocking back and forth on a park bench in Pigeon Park, right in downtown Vancouver. And I was trying to figure out where I was going to get $10. You see, the thing about having those symptoms is that, you know, unlike the flu, $10 makes them go away, just like that. And I needed $10, and I didn't want to rob or steal, but I needed to find $10. And I remember looking down at my feet, and I came up with what I thought was my best idea. And I walked into the bar across the street, and I sold those boots off my feet. And I remember walking out of that pub completely broken as a human being, you know, and I had no shoes. And I remember my foot touched that cold concrete sidewalk, and I felt hopeless. I felt alone. And I just, you know, I remember thinking to myself, I just don't want to be here anymore. Yeah, I didn't know what to do or where to turn. And, you know, and I believe that in this moment, something really beautiful happened for me. Is I made the decision to do something different with my life. I finally made a decision that I was gonna, you know, try and turn this thing around. And, you know, in desperation, I said a little prayer on that street corner, you know, and I asked for help. And I would never describe myself as someone who's deeply religious, but, you know, I remember saying something like, give me a second chance. I don't deserve it, but if you give me a second chance, I promise I'll make good on the opportunity. I won't waste it, and I'll do something to pay it forward and help someone else. You know, the next day I walked into a shelter that was run by, I think it was the Salvation Army. And there was a guy in there, I think his name was Bob. And he sat down with me. First thing he got me was a pair of shoes, because I didn't have any shoes. And then he said, what do you want to do, Joe? And I said, I think I want to go to alcohol and drug treatment. And he said, okay. And he said, so we did an inventory of assets I had in my life. And one of the people I had in my life was my mom. And so he said, let's call your mom. And I was reluctant, because I had put my mom through a lot of stuff. And I didn't want to really call mom, but I did. And I begged her for a second chance. And she said, okay, I'll help you, son. And she flew out to Vancouver, met me on the corner of Main and Hastings, right in front of the Carnegie, right downtown. And I remember, you know, at the time I was about 160 pounds. I had sores all over my face from drugs. And I remember her giving me a hug and saying, let's get you the help you need, son. And she flew me back to Ontario. I entered into a detox facility and then a full residential treatment program. And a lot of what happened in those days 30 years ago is the man sitting in front of you today. You know, oftentimes I think to myself, where would I be without mom? You know, before I left the downtown east side, I met a man who would define my mantra in life, and his name was Gus. And I met him on a street corner, actually on a bus shelter in front of the Army and Navy, waiting for the number 10 Fraser bus. And this guy was this beautiful man. And I remember I sat down beside him because he had cigarettes, and I was, you know, I was a mooch. So I wanted to borrow a cigarette off him, and he gave me a smoke, but he gave me something bigger. I remember him looking at me, and he had these beautiful blue eyes, and he says, you know, Joe, he says, you're an amazing young man. He says, if you were able to deal with your addiction and homelessness, you could go out into the world and you could do something extraordinary with your life. He looked at me and he said, there's more to you than you can see. Now you have to understand, at the time, I was a guy who was wearing the same clothes for over a year. I had extremely poor personal hygiene. I had yellow teeth that were broken, hair I hadn't washed, you know, for months, scruffy beard, black fingernails. But he looked past all of how I was presenting and spoke to my possibility. And for the first time in my life, someone other than mom or dad spoke to my potential. And there was this glimmer of hope. It turns out that Gus was right. There was more to me. And back in Ontario, after 6 months in treatment, I had this social worker who tricked me into going back to college, a little community college in our town called Loyalist. And, and I say that he tricked me because I had no intention of going back to school. I grew up thinking I was stupid. You know, Carol Dweck talks about growth versus fixed mindset. She's a researcher, and she one of the greatest determinants of success in life in children is kids that put effort forward. If a kid believes that they're dumb, they're not going to try. And if they don't try, they're not going to discover anything about themselves. But if you try, that's when you discover it. If you take actions and move forward. So I would have never taken this action on myself to go back to college because I really thought I was dumb. I failed out of 3 of the 4 high schools in Barrie. Anyways, he tricked me into going back to school. And by the way, I've been telling that story for decades, 2 decades. And I was at a conference in Ontario, and it was a social worker conference. And I said, this guy Brian tricked me. And I hear in the back of the room, I'm right here. And it was really cool because he was actually at the conference, and I got to thank him personally for his influence. And it's funny because he never really understood how big a role he played in my life by simply encouraging. And I think that's what great leaders do, don't they? Is they get people out to do something outside of your comfort zone. You know, I have a motto every single day: do something hard, right? Do something outside of your comfort zone, because it's there and only there that you'll discover your potential and possibility. You know, I've had a chance to share and speak with over 1 million young people over the years. And I'll always ask them the same question. He said, you know, that test that you had, that exam, that thing, that project that you were anxious about, you waited the last minute and then finally you got busy, and, you know, the night before, and you did it and you got a B or you got an A. You see, that possibility was always there. It was the emotion that'll trick you. It's the fear that'll rob you, that'll move your foot from moving forward. The trick in life is to take advancement, take steps in the face of emotional uncertainty. Something beautiful happened at Loyalist. I started to come into my own. I started to grow. I started to do really well, but then I hit a roadblock. I started to feel like I didn't belong there, you know, and I wanted to quit. And I remember I went into my professor. His name was Tom Thorne. I went into his office and I said, I want you to sign this paperwork because I'm quitting. And he said, I'm not signing that. And I said, well, I'm not hanging around. He said, do me a favor, Joe. He said, take the weekend, come back and see me Monday and let's talk. And so I said, okay, I'll take the weekend, just out of respect for him. And I went back on Monday and he said, I cannot in a clear conscience sign off on this because I don't know where your life is going to go if you don't have this. And he was right. For me, in so many ways, going back to school was foundational to my recovery. Having that community was important for me to grow and learn and stabilize my life. And he said to me, anything you need from me, it's yours. My door is open. Well, I ended up pulling out of that nosedive and I moved forward and I started to get A's and B's. And finally, you know, after 3.5 years on a beautiful June afternoon, they called my name, Joe Roberts, Dean's List. And I walked across that stage at Loyalist with a 3.94 GPA. You know, the kid who thought he was dumb. I still didn't get a haircut though. I went down to where mom was sitting and she gave me a kiss on the cheek and she said, I'm really proud of you, son. You know, on a day where I should have been celebrating, you know what my thought was? Is how many people in this world that I knew coming up in Vancouver and in Barrie and Midland who had all the potential that I had that never made it that far. They didn't have my mom. They didn't have Professor Thorne. They didn't have Gus on a park bench saying, I believe in you. And that drives a lot of the work that I do today. By the way, I've had an opportunity to go back to that school and properly thank Tom and other professors and people who were instrumental. You know, I'm not a self-made success story. I'm here today because of over 10,000 people who invested in me, people who helped me. You know, I had to go out into the world and get a job. And so I went out and I got my first job working in Minolta, selling copiers and fax machines. And, you know, one of the things that I discovered is that all the adversity was actually an asset. And I remember I was being interviewed by Maclean's magazine one day, and they said, you're successful in spite of being homeless. And I said, well, that's where you're wrong. I'm successful because I was homeless. You see, I believe that the pandemic and everything that's happened to us and every adversity and challenge and change that we've been through shapes us. And in that hurt, in that pain is an asset, right? When you think about the last couple of years, you will never, ever see the world without seeing it through the lens of what you've been through. Today, my greatest life experience has been living in the downtown east side. I've been able to impact and connect with and engage over 1 million young people. I've been able to sit down with federal governments. I've had the opportunity to impact professionally, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people as a speaker, as a philanthropist, as an advocate. None of that would have happened. You think about what you've been through, the challenge, the change, it's forever shaped you. You know, I put my head down and got after Minolta, a friend of mine asked me to join a small technology company. I joined and we put our head down. We worked really hard, just like I learned in school. And after 4 years, we'd built this, one of the fastest growing media development companies. And one day I was on my way to work, and sometimes when you're in your car and you zone out and you go from driveway to driveway, I was in that sort of state of mind. And I was driving through the old neighborhood. And I got stopped at a light, and I remember I looked out the car window, right at the corner of Dunlevy and Hastings, right in that epicenter. And there was a kid who was about 18, 19, pushing a shopping cart. And that's when it hit me. When I got to the office that day, sitting on my desk was a copy of Canadian Business, and I was on the cover of it. In less than 12 years, I went from a kid pushing a shopping cart, struggling, to having more success than I could have ever imagined in my life. I need to say it again if I haven't already. I'm not special. I'm just somebody who put one foot in front of the other, who found something passionate to move and direct his energy towards. And I managed to transform and find this bigger and better part of my life. Now, this would be a good story if we finished here, but something happened. I got to a place in my life where I had all the things that our Western culture define as success. This is what brings you happiness, the stuff, the money, the accolades, the house on the hill, and I wasn't happy. Far from it. And it began to gnaw at me as a greater sense of purpose. I wanted to do work that had meaning. I wanted to do work that had oomph. I wanted to do work that meant something. All right. And so I left in 2003. I left my company, and the funny thing is, I was at the height of my success, but I built a company to my level of incompetence, Peter's principle, and I decided that this wasn't for me anymore. My daughter was born in 2003, and I wanted to be more of a hands-on dad, and so I left. I sold my piece of the company, and I went out into the world to try and find something that had a little bit more passion and purpose. Well, a few years had passed, and I found myself working with a gentleman named Dr. Sean Richardson. He's a premier sports psychologist. In fact, I'm going to share some of his content in part 2 of today's session on energy, health management, stress, and burnout. And anyways, I was working with Sean, and we were flying to see a client in Calgary. And I turned to Sean and I told him about the promise I had made on the street corner in Vancouver. The promise to pay it forward. Now, I'd already made good on the one promise, right? But I said to Sean something like, I want to do something to make a difference for marginalized children in this country. There's just so many young people that come from impossible environments, that struggle with mental health, that struggle with generational trauma, poverty, limiting mindset, that struggle with just unthinkable challenges. And I wanted to do something to leverage my story to point to what we could do to better support these kids so that they transition safely into adulthood. And in this conversation I was having with Sean totally got it because he's a psychologist. He totally understands early childhood development and da 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 da. And as an Olympic athlete, a former Olympic athlete, he really, he thinks big. And so we started, kind of talking about what could we do to engage the country? Oh, it could be fun. How could we inspire people to see the issues and really create systemic change? And I said, well, how do we do that? And Sean said, well, why don't, he says, we were on this flight into Calgary, and he says, I got it. He says, when Canadians want to inspire people and raise money, we run across the country. That's kind of our thing in Canada. He was thinking about Terry Fox and, of course, Rick Hansen. He says, why don't you run across Canada, Joe? And I remember looking at him and I said, well, why don't you run across Canada? The last thing in the world I'm going on to do is run across Canada. It's a rather wide country, Sean. And so we kind of had a chuckle there. And what was really interesting is it just immediately hit my probability. Like, this isn't something that's probable for me. And I have to explain why. At the time, I was 45 years old. I was a non-athlete. I failed gym in grade 9, true story. So I never really was a sporty person. I couldn't see myself doing something that big. And he said, well, maybe you don't run. What if you walked? And I said, well, if I walked across Canada, he says, yeah, if you walk, you could speak to kids. You could go to high schools. You could talk to politicians. You're good at telling your story, Joe. You'd inspire some people. And I kind of like that idea. And I said, well, how would the walk be different? And Sean says, why don't you, he says, I got it. He says, why don't you push a shopping cart? It's the symbol of chronic homelessness, the thing that you're trying to avoid for every single kid. And he says, it's also part of your story. And there was something about that, that made the hair on my neck go up. And so, I asked for his help and support, and he said, I'm all in. And so the first problem we had was a shopping cart. All right. Now, we had a lot of problems, but that was the first one. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I go to Walmart or Home Depot or Superstore or Safeway, I always get the shopping cart with the wheel that doesn't quite work right. And I wasn't going to push a real shopping cart. So what did we do? We created a think tank at a local high school. We got a whole bunch of young people together, real smart young people. And we said, what would you do? Like, this is what we want to do. We want to go across Canada. We want to talk about, changing the system. We want to talk about better supporting kids with mental health, addiction, trauma, so that they, don't end up on the streets. But we want to push a shopping cart. And they said, well, don't push a shopping cart. That's kind of big and clunky. They said, push something like a shopping cart. We said, what's like a shopping cart? They said, a baby carriage. And I was like, oh, that's smart. They said, take a baby carriage, transform it into a shopping cart. It's lightweight. You can push it through the winter. And, they were onto something, because there's no way to go across Canada walking without enduring one Canadian winter at least. So we went out and we asked the local carriage company, baby carriage company, for some shopping carts, and Chariot Carriers gladly donated $4,000 worth of gear. We took it to a local metal fabricator, and boom, 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 they welded it together. And just like that, in 3 weeks, we had our prototype. Well, now all we had was 9,999 other problems. But what we did over the next several years is we held that possibility, and we continued to take action steps towards it. And I cannot begin to tell you about how many seemingly insurmountable problems we faced, but somehow each and every one of them we navigated, and finally got to the place where I was in Cape Spear, Newfoundland on May 1st, 2016, ready to walk 9,000 kilometers across the country. Well, one of the biggest problems that we had is we had to raise over $1 million to pay for the campaign, because we didn't want to take money out of communities to actually pay for gas and food and, support money. And so we had to go out and fundraise that and get sponsors to support it. So we got an RV, we got a PACE vehicle, we collected a team, and on the night before May 1st, this is me in Cape Spear, the most easterly point of North America. And in front of me is 9,000 kilometers. And I'm smiling in this picture. But I have to tell you that inside I was absolutely terrified. I had two massive fears. One, nobody was going to care. And two, my body wasn't going to make it. This video I'm going to share with you right now captures what actually happened on that 17-month journey. It's very inspiring. I know you're going to love it. So here it is.
This is for, every kid in this country who feels different, who gets stuck. And it's our responsibility to reach out and help those children transition safely into adulthood.
Sometimes it's
Coming over the bridge, here we are, and there's Joe. Push for change.
Have courage to fight, the people around you care. There's no wrong or right, just a love that we can share. Ain't no pain, how we've suffered along the way. Underneath our clothes, our souls remain unchanged.
They're awesome.
Take off your mask of fear and push for change. Throw off your coat down and embrace the rain. Everyone is unique, yet we're a part of the human race. Uncertain, but it'll be worthwhile. Through moments of darkness, they seem to last for miles, miles and miles. Don't lose sight of the brilliance that you are. There is more in you than you can see. You gotta trust your heart. Whoa, whoa. We take off your mask, fear, and push for change. Throw off your coat down and embrace the rain. Each of us is unique, yet we're a part of the human race. We won't do this alone, so together we'll push for change. Push for change. Yeah, yeah.
When the campaign was over, I had walked 11,375,000 steps, and I didn't lose a pound. There's no justice. 9,064 kilometers. Thank you for the kind comments, Marie and Mike. I think, you know, what was more inspiring was how Canadians responded. And my greatest, muscle weighs more. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, you're very supportive. The truth is I didn't change my diet, but that's another workshop entirely. But what was awesome about this campaign was community engagement. And we got an opportunity to speak and connect and walk with over 100,000 young people. And we had tremendous support. You know, we started off as a grassroots campaign for people. And, you know, it's not so important that we connected and met with that government leader. It's that we connected with anybody, right? Because we started off with just an RV and a hope of making change in Newfoundland. Coming through Atlantic Canada was excellent. People were warm and welcoming, but it was sparse. But when we got to Ontario, things changed. The Ontario Provincial Police came on board as our community safety partner. And I remember walking into Ontario and waiting for us at the bottom of the bridge into Hawkesbury was about 1,000 kids and a large contingent of the Ontario Provincial Police. And as I got towards the bottom of the bridge, I got a little emotional because there was somebody waiting for me. It was the greatest hockey dad in the world, Walter Gretzky. And I remember I got to walk with this iconic legend, you know. And I turned to Walter and I said, Walter, you know, you're someone I respect a great deal. I'm about to walk into Northern Ontario. What one piece of advice would you give me? And I remember Walter putting his hand on my shoulder and he said, don't quit. He said, the work you're doing is so important. It impacts people's lives. Don't quit. I remember at the time thinking that was trite. You know, it was kind of surface, wasn't deep enough. I wanted something more. I've had a lot of time to think about those words. You know, I also think if everybody who's ever challenged had a Walter in their corner to say, don't quit, I think we'd be a more resilient people. Now, Walter was right. You know, I needed to dig that out and dust it off many, many nights and many days. And because when I got into Northern Ontario, it just got weird. The snow up there, this was taken near Sault Ste. Marie, and just lots of snow, lots of cold. It got strange I decided to walk over Lake Superior in the wintertime. So I was in Sudbury around the end of January, beginning of February, I was in Sault. Middle of February, I was in Wawa, and then like the end of February, early March, I was in Thunder Bay. So it's not like I've ever been really good at making life choices, but there were some reasons why we did that. It got weird up there, and then it got weirder. I posted this on social media, and my mom phones me. She was following this thing on she was following this thing on the Facebook there. And she says, yeah, you kids in your dangerous selfies, when you see a bear, you don't take a picture, you run. And I said, Mom, it's Photoshop. She says, I don't care what kind of bear it is. And, you know, so there was that. We explained to Mom it was a doctored image, and we got her to stand down. But when I was in Northern Ontario, I was having some doubts. And I remember what Walter told me. Don't quit. My knees were hurting, my hip flexors were hurting, my ankles were hurting. It was really hard. And in fact, in the second part, you know, we're going to finish this up in a minute, and we're going to change the conversation and talk about stress and burnout. I'm going to be really transparent about some of the things I did wrong in the walk across Canada that really relate to a lot of what's gone on for many people during, you know, the last couple of years. But I was at this place where everything hurt. I was tired. I was exhausted. I was overwhelmed. And I wanted to give up, but I went out and did it anyway. And at the end of the day, I rounded the corner and I was standing in the shadow of the Wawa goose. Now, I don't know what it is about this stupid goose that's so Canadian, but it seems to make it into every montage of Canadiana. And something beautiful happened for me when I got here. You see, I was halfway across Lake Superior in the dead of winter. I had endured minus 50 degrees with 70 kilometer an hour biting winds. You know, whatever I was afraid of in Newfoundland, I left on a highway somewhere. And I knew in that moment that I was going to make it. I knew in that moment that whatever I had just gone through was bigger than what was ahead of me. I'll say that again. Whatever I had just been through was bigger than what was ahead of me. And I knew I was going to be okay. And I feel that sense of hope today. Something else happened for me is I also had this flooding feelings of patriotism and gratitude for having had the opportunity to call Canada my home. Now, whether Canada is your home or you're visiting, or yeah, you want it to be your home, welcome to what me and my family believe one of the greatest places on earth. I live in a country that paid for my college education, a country that helped me go through detox, to help me find my possibility. Now, Canada is so much more than Rocky Mountains and timber and lakes and wheat fields and lobsters and gooses. We are a country of collected values. And I knew in that moment and was reminded of something that me and my family have known for a long time, that we live in one of the best places on earth. We are the true north, strong and free. And I know that because my name is Joe and I am Canadian. I usually kind of throw my arms in the air when I do that live. And you know what the funny thing about that little shtick? That's from a beer commercial, which is irony on irony. But anyways, I did have that feeling like I was going to make it, and Canada all the way, right on. So and I was right, because a few months later, I walked into the downtown east side, and I walked right down that old street, East Hastings. You know, back in the day, I used to be so ashamed when I pushed my shopping cart. I'd always keep my head down. I wouldn't make eye contact. I had social anxiety, but I also had a lot of shame. Not that day. I didn't feel ashamed pushing my cart. I looked over my shoulder at about 1,000 people. We went all the way down Hastings and we turned at the cenotaph and we went up to the library. When I got to the library, the United Association of Canada gave me a check for $1 million to continue to do the work in supporting youth empowerment all across the country. There's someone I need to acknowledge who worked harder than me on this campaign, and that's Marie. Marie was our campaign director. She fielded every email, literally hundreds of thousands of emails. Every event had her fingerprints on it. Every dollar that we raised, and we raised millions. You know, she was the heart behind the cart. She came with us on the road. She was in the RV in the summer, in the hotel rooms in the winter. And if it wasn't for her, the campaign wouldn't have happened. I'm fond of Marie for her dedication, her commitment, and her values. You know, they say if you want to go fast, go yourself. If you want to go far, you do it with a team. And Marie was, you know, that team. I'm fond of Marie for everything that she put into this campaign, but also because we share our life together as husband and wife. And so today it's our collective values and our vision for wanting to do good in the world, to wanting to inspire people to be better, to want to leave, you know, this earth a little bit better after we're gone. And so it is that collective vision that lights the path forward, but we're also connected by something else. Marie and I are also connected by history. That's because Marie, she's the same girl from grade 10. And after 28 years, we reconnected. We fell in love again, and we got married 2 months before the push for change shoved off. Friends, I believe in possibility, and I believe that we can create the change that we want to see in the world. Right? But it starts with courageous action. I believe that what's happened in the last 2 years, when we reframe it and look at it, not to diminish any of the, you know, any of the grief, any of the tragedy, but as we work through it, we can become stronger. Every time adversity introduces us and meets us in life, it always says the same thing. We're so much more than this. We're more than the things that have happened to us. We're more than the things that have been said to us. We're more than the things that have been done to us. We're more than COVID. We're more than the challenges and the division that exists in our country and our world today. And we can transition and rise above that. I believe that in the not too distant future, we're going to look back at this and call it before, as each one of us wakes up to our potential, our possibility, and grabs the torch that's our mantle, our push for change, and walks forward with courageous action. We can and will change the world around us. But not a minute before we change ourselves. And the reason I believe that is the first time I had that idea, I was sitting on a piece of cardboard begging for change in front of the Thurlow liquor store. I'll close up this portion of our session today with a poem inspired by my friend Gus, and it's called There's More to You. He picked up a can and continued his walk. This man I saw today, with dirty hair and layered old clothes, he reeked of dreams decayed. With broken tooth and crackled smile, he mumbled for some change. I passed him by, this man I saw, picking through garbage today. You know, a wrong turn here and a bad choice there can lead the best to pain. Such is the fate of some, I guess, to live that life insane. The junkie bum, the wino scum, I have no time today. I'm off to live my life divine. I passed this man today. So off I walked beyond the block and waited for the light. Beside me was a hair salon with mirrors shining bright. I looked at the man in the three-piece suit staring back at me that night, for it was me looking nothing like that man I used to fight. For back those blocks left years behind, before I found the key, I realized that man I saw was nothing more than me. Behind me is a broken man, a man you see now free. Life is grand when you understand. There's more to you. There's more to you. There's more to you than what you see. On July 26, 1991, I began a journey searching for the better part of me. And I found it. I found it thanks to the better part of you. I'm here today because of teachers, because of educators, because of people that support that system. I'm here today because of those 5 people in my life. And so I want to thank and acknowledge you for the incredible contribution that you make into this world. And I know that sometimes it's difficult, especially in the last couple of years. We get discouraged. I want to encourage you to reconnect to your passion, reconnect to why you do what you do. Get excited about life again, because each and every one of us matters and each and every one of us makes a difference. And on behalf of me and my family, I just want to thank you. I see you. Thank you for allowing me to share this simple story and message with you. So that concludes sort of part 1 this morning. I want to encourage you, if you're on LinkedIn, this is a place where I spend my time. Come and connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me on or learn a little bit more about what I do as a speaker, or you think there's an event or a fundraiser or a group that I'd be good for, you can find everything out at Skid Row CEO. I'm also right now in the chat feature. I'm going to give everyone my personal email address. Okay. J1. Yeah, there's my personal email address. Sometimes in an event like this, when we open it up for questions and stuff, people don't want to ask a personal question. They'd like to sort of connect with me directly. So that's how you can do that. We're going to take just a tiny micro break right now. I don't want you to even go that far away from your monitor, from wherever you're viewing this. I want it to be 3 minutes. And I just kind of want things to settle, because the tempo of what we're going to do next is more workshop. I'll be asking you some questions. We're going to delve into some material on stress and burnout. It's really great stuff. Please stick around. So let's take 3 minutes right now. It's 1:54, so we'll meet back here at 1:57. I don't want to waste. Okay, let's jump back in. I want to move quick because we only have 3.5 hours left. Nobody's laughing at that. That was funnier in my head. We have about an hour and 3 minutes. And I want to get you across some content that will help you deal with stress and burnout. And it's content from something called the Energy Health Management, Energy Health Performance series. Now, this particular pile of information, there's about 17 hours of workshop content. We're not going to go anywhere near that today, but what I do want to do is I want to scratch the surface and give you some tools to help better deal with stress, burnout, and self-care. So some of this is going to seem maybe like common sense, but it's actually based on Dr. Sean Richardson's PhD work in elite athletes. So it's really excellent, peer-reviewed, data-based info. And how I came across it is the hard way. You see, I just told you the story of walking across Canada, but what I didn't tell you about is the challenges that I faced that were very COVID-like. I found myself about 9 months into this campaign, and I was completely overwhelmed, physically, mentally, and emotionally. Every day I woke up, it was like Groundhog Day, and there was another big problem to solve and another big problem to solve. And I kept having this mindset that all I got to do is push through and get to the next, but eventually all of that sort of stopped working. Now, the good news for me is that Sean, being a psychologist and really understanding burnout and injury in elite athletes, was there to help support me when I finally called him and said, this isn't working. And the campaign almost came to a halt. And the one thing that he got me to do that during that time is it was sort of like this triage phone call. He said, what are 3 things that you're doing right now that you shouldn't be doing, that are none of your business, that you can give to somebody else? And what 3 things can you do starting today to help you gain more recovery, to help you refresh, to help you decompress? And that's that's sort of the framework behind what I want to share with you between now and 3 o'clock. So I gave you an introduction to the backstory. The story is designed to inspire, to open up possibilities, to get you to really think big and beyond, right? That's one of the things that I do, the best I believe that when we inspire, we can tap into emotion. When we tap into emotion, we can get our feet moving. We can get unstuck. I got inspired when I went to my very first 12-step recovery meeting. Hey, if that guy can do it, I can do it. And so then I came back, and the next thing you know, I've got a couple of decades of sobriety, right? Inspiration, I believe, is the ignition. But today, for the next hour, we're going to talk about the application, right? So it's not just inspiration, because inspiration without application is, this will fade fast if you don't actually do something different. So we're going to talk about energy health performance. We're going to talk about the health and performance relationship. We're going to talk about a performance continuum, a really cool little tool that you can self-identify where you are. We're going to then show you the various different areas of stress and energy depletion and how we need to balance those. And then I'm going to give you some take-home information. I've also got a pile, like a really good toolkit. So for anybody who wants to go and sort of take this and run with it, I've got a 10-day challenge that's available to you. I've got these worksheets, and I can tell you what you need to do with them. And I'm also available via email if you've got a question or something to unpack or to share with me that I don't cover in the content. All right, so let's jump right in. Why you? Why would getting better at energy health management be of value today to you? I think today, more than ever, people are dealing with a heavier load in life than before. We've got a war in Ukraine. We've got division in our country. We've got COVID. We've got vaccines. We got trucker convoys. We've got, and then, we've got COVID, we got all of that. And then on top of all of those things, these are those big macro things that are out there. Each one of us has our own battles. Maybe relationship stuff, personal health issues. And what can happen during, all of these challenges and changes, it can trigger sort of that fight or flight and fear response. And human beings don't do very well with fear and uncertainty, right? So the question is, what's really going on and what can we do to better respond? I think right across the board, most people I meet are looking for strategies, looking for ideas that can help them recharge their batteries, you know, get along a little bit better in life and get to some sort of new sense of normal. Okay. And I don't know what it is for you. There's also something in here for that individual who says, no, I'm doing great, but I want to kill it. I want to do more. I want to squeeze more out of life. Well, the cool thing about the curriculum and the ideas is they work whether you are at the bottom dealing with burnout or you're an elite person trying to be the best in the world. In fact, when you master these ideas, that's where they can take you. So let's just jump in and what I want to do now, and it's a little different than what we did up to this point, is I want us to use the chat feature in Zoom. And I'm going to show you a set of symptoms that has to do with our mind and our mental and emotional symptoms of energy imbalance. So what I want you to do here, the instructions are simple. I want you to read through these 10, okay? And I want you to count and give yourself 1 for any of these that you may have experienced in the last 30 days, okay? So just have a quick read through the energy imbalance. By the way, there is this handout that would have came in a PDF, and this sheet is in here. But if you don't have if you have the sheet, work off the sheet. If you don't have the sheet, that's fine. You can just work off the screen. I want you to go through this and see how many of these that you come up with. And for those of you who are willing to share in the chat, tell me what your number is. Did you have 2 of these things going on in the last 30 days? 5 of these things going on? More than 5 of these? You got 10. Okay. 10, Marie says. 10. Can we say 10 twice? Yes. We have another list coming up. 10, 10, 8, 7. Yeah, 8, 7, right. 7, 7, average 8. So, okay. I do know that some of you are working in a bigger room. So when I ask the questions, you feel free to answer however you want, or just let me know this is from the room and average response, or however you want to type that in. I do know that some of you are viewing this individually and some of you are viewing this as a group. 7, 9. So there's a general consensus right now that it's above 5. Okay, I think that's fair to say. Oh, we got 4. Good for you, Gail. Okay, 4. All right, good for you, Jennifer. So let's now move to energy imbalance on body physical. The same instructions. Go through this. And how many of these have you experienced in the last 30 days? Is it 3? Is it 5? Is it 10? And then go ahead and throw that into the chat feature. 3, okay. 6, 5, 5, 4, 1, 5, 4, 5, 5, 8, 9, 10. We get 10, 4, 7, 5, 7. Okay, 4. Numbers were a little bit lower. Okay, here's the question I have for you. So these are just basically average 5. Okay, thanks, Jane. Julia's got 1. So here's the question I want to ask you. When you've got this stuff going on, what would 1 word or 2 words or a sentence be that describes how you feel when you've got mental, emotional, and these physical things going on? What 1 word would you describe when you've got 5 or more of those going on in either category or both categories? Anxiety, overwhelmed, done. Yeah. Cranky, numb, exhausted, stressed, deflated, alone, disappointed, anxious, retire. I'm not sure if retire is you're retiring, you've got your, or it's time to retire and refresh. Interestingly enough, there's an exodus going on in industries all across the board. Hopeless, flat, overwhelmed, exhausted. We're seeing more and more people now because of what's happened in the last couple of years who are taking retirement early. Exit work and retire, exhausted, hopeless. I want to just kind of stop for a second here because it's something that happened, and it's happened a couple of different times where I've asked this, is that I find it very curious, okay, where we go from overwhelmed, stressed, deflated to something that's maybe a little more personal, like alone or hopeless. When I was doing the walk across Canada and I wasn't keeping up, it stopped being about it, behavior, and started being about me, the person. So instead of feeling like, oh, look, I'm a normal human being and this is overwhelming, it started to be like, I'm not good enough. And that's where it sort of, I found it interesting how quickly when you get to the bottom of the continuum on burnout, that's when, you know, it can start to be about mental health, because we quickly stop being about it, yeah, and it starts being about us. And the reality is it's not. But we tend to take this on, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but when I am completely flat and burnt out, I'm emotionally vulnerable, and I start to take it on that it's about me, yeah, I'm not good enough, and that I have all these other kind of icky feelings that are associated with that. All right. Yeah, it transfers. It absolutely does, Marie. Yeah, so true. I'm glad you see that. Okay, good. So let's jump and say, okay, so we've got some emotional stuff going on, we got physical stuff going on. How do you respond? Right? What are your typical responses when you got depletion? When your battery's low? What do you reach for? What do you do? And I'll tell you something, most often our first response, they're not the best responses. Now, there's no judgment on this list that I'm going to show you right now. No judgment whatsoever. These are very normal and predictable things. I said it in the keynote. When human beings are dealing with uncertainty, burnout, exhaustion, we will scramble to try and get the energy back in. But oftentimes, the things that we are doing are short-term gains, but they have long-term detrimental effect, right? So here's a list of 10 items, and this by no means is exhaustive, but which ones, go ahead and count through here and see how many of these you come up with. And then in the chat feature, just tell me what's your favorite, what are your top three? Mine were coffee, sleep, and mindset. That's kind of why it's written like that. I had a mindset of I just got to keep going. You know, I ran the walk across Canada like my company on 5 hours sleep, and there's just no way to do that when you're 6 hours exercising every single day. And then when my battery got low, I would just reach for coffee. What are your favorites? Right? Is it top three? Yeah. Netflix. By the way, these are not exhaustive, right? There's all kinds of other things that can be in here. And it's interesting when you look at the Canadian Center for Substance Abuse Disorder, there's just been a trend in the last year and a half of an uptick in recreational drugs, uptick in alcohol, uptick in sugary snacks and takeout food. I mean, when we're exhausted, who wants to go home and cook nutritious food? We just hit that drive-through window. It's easy, right? Problem is that takeout food then further robs you of energy because it's not the right thing you should be putting in your body. Coping mechanisms, coffee, Friday, just got to get out mindset. Is it Friday yet? Yes, rest is for the dead. By the way, the other thing worth pointing out on this response is that some of these are more offensive than others. So for example, ripping through your lunch break to catch up on emails is not nearly as offensive as robbing yourself of sleep. Sidebar, if you want to learn about sleep, there's a guy named Dr. Matthew Walker. He's been studying sleep for 30 years. He's absolutely brilliant. He's a world-renowned expert. He's got a great TED Talk on it. Highly recommend you check him out, Dr. Matthew Walker. He said that, and this was the one that was stabbing to me, the amount of sleep you get is directly related to the amount of life you live. Something to that effect. And that really caused me to pause. It's not a matter of robbing myself of sleep, simply that I cannot sleep. Yeah, see, and that's another issue, and that's, you know, it's related to, well, I don't want to get into it because I don't want to be an armchair psychologist, but why you're not sleeping, yeah. I mean, what's that root, right? And there's some strategies for that. If it's mental, if it's emotional, if it's the environment that you're sleeping in, if it's the prep time. Dr. Matthew Walker talks about preparing for sleep an hour before we go to sleep. But I have uninterrupted sleep, especially when my hamster wheel is going, and I have to find ways and strategies through the day to try and calm my mind. Sometimes it's exercise, sometimes it's, you know, meditation or walking, or, you know, deconstructing with a friend, or, you know, doing some, you know, going to a therapy group, or, you know, just finding different ways to deal with what is the underlying issue that may be related to sleep. Because sleep is just sort of a, you know, an outcome, but what's really, you know, that piece, right? So let's do something positive now. Let's switch gears here a bit and talk about what are some of the things that you do. Give me one or two ideas that you do or have done or are doing now that help you recharge your battery. And I want everybody to try and contribute here, because it's really good for everyone to see everyone else's ideas, because this is where, you know, people might pick an idea up off of you. So what are some of the things that you do to help your mental health, to help you with self-care, to help you decompress, to help you recharge your battery? Spend time in nature, exercise, nature photography, exercise in the sun, walk to and from work, yoga, running, exercise, creative writing, art therapy, cuddle with the dog, listen to music, reading, vacation, going for a walk, camping, kayaking, visiting with friends. Yeah. Look for the positive, walk, play with the puppy, funny animal videos, meditate, walk, talk, friends, play, hug my granddaughter, sunshine and fresh air, trees, visit supportive friend, dinner with girlfriends, distance running, beer, cuddles with my own littles, camping, art, nails, complete projects that have been put on indefinite hold. Funny enough, I bought a carpet spot remover and cleaned my carpets and rugs. Hey, I'm not sure what your first name is, but if you're coming to Vancouver, you could relieve some stress at my house. Kayak. I love that. It's creative, right? Purging the house. Yeah, Marie and I actually did that. We went through our closet. She saw this video on YouTube from this Japanese woman who's all about declutter, and she said, go through everything that you own, hold it. If it brings you joy, keep it. If it doesn't, get rid of it. That declutter process. Okay, there's really good ideas here, and I want to actually come back to that, because we're going to take a look at how do we then chart these with the other areas of our lives that have energy demands, and how do we balance those. So this was a really good start to this brainstorming process. So let's talk a little bit about why this. I think talking about how we manage energy is probably one of the most critical conversations we need to have in 2022. We're coming out of a watershed moment in human history that has taken its toll. You know, it's funny, when the pandemic hit, I found myself in a very unique position, because as I watched people start to have challenges that they'd never faced in their life, stress, anxiety, overwhelm, overwork, having trouble sleeping, I completely empathize with them, because it reminded me of that time in my life. That time in my life where I was socially disconnected, where I didn't have access to resources, where I didn't know when or if it was going to end, where every day was a challenge and it got harder and harder and harder. And I didn't know if I could cope. And I went to bed with problems that didn't have solutions and woke up with those same problems, and I had to somehow make it through. And now I'm not describing the last 2 years, I'm describing the late 1980s and my experience living on the streets of Vancouver. And so there was this immediate recognition of, I've been here before, yeah, but I know what to do. So I think that one of the things that we want to look at is, what are some strategies for us to be smart about energy? Now, in the 1990s, when I was a business person running a small corporation in Vancouver, there was a lot of buzz about time management. There was, you got to schedule your emails, you got your appointments, and CRMs were a big thing back then. And there was all of this idea about managing time, and there were lots of things being thrown around, like you got to work smarter and not harder. And I think there's some real value in this. All right, don't get me wrong, but I think that the problem with work smarter, not harder, is there's a promise in here that you're somehow going to circumnavigate hard work. All right, and I just feel that's categorically false. It's misleading. It's just not the reality that we live in. Tim Ferriss comes out with a book that says 4-hour work week. Well, I've met over 2,500 tech CEOs. I haven't met one of them that works 4 hours. Could you do your job on 4 hours? Could you manage your workload on 4 hours a week? If so, let's chat. No, thank you. Yeah, and so it's not really about time management or working smarter. At the end of the day, look, time is a constraint, right? But what is manageable is energy. Energy is a resource. Think about the days where you've been like, wow, you're so productive. You get everything done. Your email box is cleared out. You go home, all the dishes are done, the house is back, and you have that. So what was going on there? Did time slow down for you? No. You had better access to energy. Maybe it was your biorhythm, maybe it's what you ate 2 days ago, maybe it's that you exercised, maybe you got an extra hour of sleep, don't know what it is, right? But it really has to do more with energy. When we manage our energy better, two things happen. We get a boost to performance and we buy ourselves more time. So it's not about time management, right? It's about energy management. Now, here's what's really interesting. There's tons of research that actually supports this idea, right? So over the last 40 years or so, there's been a number of different studies. They're different but similar in that they study a group of people put into a room who have to solve a complex problem, right? Group A has to push through, right? They don't get a break. They've got to solve this problem. They've got to, go hard until it's resolved. Group B is allowed to break from that. They're allowed to rejuvenate. They're allowed to eat, go for lunch. There's no time frame. I mean, obviously they want to get it done as fast as possible, but they've got some flexibility. Here's what's interesting about these studies is the group B always gets the job done quicker. Yeah, they do so with higher measurable innovation and creativity, and report a better sense of well-being. So the key here is that breaks actually make us smarter and help us buy more time. But how many times have you heard yourself say in the last year or 6 months, I don't have time to take a break? I want to challenge that. I want to challenge that the next time you hear yourself say that is, I don't have time not to take a break, right? Because the reality is it's in those rest periods that we're able to let the dust settle a little bit, give our brains, a little bit of a rest, give our bodies a little bit of a rest, and move forward. One of the biggest things that we advocate in the energy health management program is something called a micro break. That's why we took 3 minutes in between the keynote and this. Micro breaks, if you take nothing out of this session, micro breaks. 5 times a day, every 75 to 90 minutes, you get up and have an adult recess, right? Now, this is not get up and go, you know, check all your texts. And this is 5 minutes where you stretch, go outside, get some fresh air. If you work in front of a monitor, break from that, close it down, you know, go for a bit of a stroll, have a, you know, a healthy piece of fruit, glass of water, maybe connect with a friend. When we do this with intention, those micro breaks, studies show, actually give us more energy at the end of the day and give our brains the break that they need in between the onslaught. The problem is that they seem counterintuitive. In fact, this whole session feels counterintuitive if you're burnt out. You know, if you're at the bottom end of the continuum, the last thing you want to do is waste time sitting here on this, you know, on this virtual session because you've got, you know, you got 45 hours of unfinished work on the corner of your desk. And that's normal. I mean, this is how our fight or flight mechanism, our parasympathetic nervous system works in our brains. That we look at investments of time and energy and quickly ascertain whether I have time for that. And if it doesn't look crucial, we don't do it. See, Stephen Covey talked about in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he said, he talked about how we need to put first things first, right? He talked about urgent versus important. And we live in a world that's all urgent, all urgent, all urgent. And as stress and energy demands have gone up in our life, recovery has gone down because guess what? We don't have time for it. And we get this gap, right? So my question, you know, is how many times, and throw this in the chat for me, how many times in the last little while, in the last couple of years, have you found yourself working long hours overtime without breaks, maybe even worn it as a badge of honor? Yes, if you've done this, no, if you haven't. Throw that in the chat for me. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, yes. See, this was one of the critical mistakes I made in the push is it's funny, it was called the push for change. I was just pushing. And I pushed myself past normal thresholds. There's also cycles. Yes, from the McKenzie Group mixed. Okay, good, thank you. Too often, yes. All right. One of the challenges that I had too often, yes. One of the challenges I had in doing my walk across Canada was that I came into this campaign with a mindset that was wrong. I thought if I just continued to give, that I would finally bust through. But there are some governors in the way our energy works. And pro athletes know this, pro coaches know this, pro sports psychologists and high performance mind people know this. The thing is that we were, you know, if you're not an elite athlete, you may not have gotten across some of this stuff. Do you know that the human being is not meant to manage moderate stress for more than 3 weeks? After 3 weeks of moderate level stress, we begin to break down. It's been more than 3 weeks. And that's what I experienced in the push, is that I kept using the mindset, pushing through, coffee, robbing myself of sleep. And then as I got into Ontario, the campaign got bigger and bigger and bigger. And because my heart was in it, you know, this is the bad side of passion. You know, the thing about people who are passionate or people who love to help people is that they always give too much and never leave enough for themselves, right? And that's where I found myself. You know, I was trying to run the campaign like I had run my business, and it started to fail and fall apart, right? And you know, that's when I reached out and I asked for help. Now, one of the things that we recognize is that there are some problems in the way we look at mental health, well-being, and performance. We talk about health and well-being as important, but high performance is really the thing that's most on our minds. We live vicariously through high performance. We celebrate it on music, in literature, in blogs. If you're a young person, you look at the Kardashians. If you're a business person, you look at Warren Buffett. If you're a technology person, maybe it's Bill Gates. You know, if you're a politician, it's this guy, right? We all have those performance icons that we sort of gravitate. This is why we watch the Stanley Cup. We want to see who hoists that trophy. Yay! You know, so when we're not vicariously living through high performance, we want to be high performance. So the problem is, when we separate well-being and performance, is that when well-being gets in the way, And you know, we only see them, first of all, we only see them as intersecting once in a while. That's the first error, right? Because these things are not just intersecting once in a while, right? They're at play in every decision and everything that we do every day. When mental health and well-being starts getting in the way of performance, whoop, we tune it out, right? We push it out of mind. When Sean first showed me, I said to him, that's a lot like alcoholism and denial. He said, bingo, that's exactly what we do. There's this trigger, this mechanism where we tune out, and it's really kind of sad because what we're doing is we're dehumanizing ourselves. Instead of saying, hey, I'm tired, and I should be tired based on what I've just gone through or I'm going through, and I may need a break. What we do is we diminish that and we tune it out, right? The problem is that the risk of putting mental health and physical health in its own bucket is that we alienate versus including it. We diminish it instead of validating ourselves. We become dismissive versus diagnostic. You know, I wear a Garmin watch because I run, I'm an amateur triathlete. So I run, I swim, I bike, and I'll look at, you know, then that downloads onto, you know, this cloud-based software that I can look at everything on this thing called Garmin Connect. And I can tell, oh, look, today was I wasn't that fast today. I wonder why. Was it sleep? Was it nutrition? Am I stacking my workouts? So I became more curious, diagnostic, right? The problem is when we diminish and we become dismissive is we'll always find ourselves painted in the corner of being reactive. This is when we're scrambling, you know, trying to get by on coffee, promising ourselves that Saturday or Sunday we'll get that rest we need, right? So there's a couple things that we can do to change this. One is to recognize that physical, mental health, and well-being need to be in a bigger bucket. Now, I know this is like, duh, of course it does. But the reason this needs to be called out loudly is that we actually don't live that way culturally. In the developed world, we talk about mental health and well-being, but we certainly don't walk that talk. And that's why we're seeing this epidemic of health problems all around us. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease, all of these things, right? And they're related to self-care. They're related to well-being, right? So physical and mental health, well-being need to be in a much bigger bucket. And so doing, we need to treat them with a bigger bucket mentality. One, keep them top of mind. You know, include them in our daily plans, routines, daily check-ins with colleagues and friends. Two, validate ourselves or others when we're not feeling 100%. Be curious, be bothered to look more closely at what's going on. And then four, be proactive. You know, make a conscious effort to plan healthy rituals into your day, your week, your month, before things get really bad. And one of the ways to do this is create some sort of accountability gamification, whether that's, you know, with a friend or with a wellness team. But I find I'm much more proactive when I'm doing this with someone else, right? Because then you've kind of baked in that accountability piece. The next thing is to recognize that high performance doesn't need to be this big category that it's in. It needs to be shrunk down to be the appropriate size that it is. And it's also not separate, is that health and well-being is foundational to high performance. Health and well-being, mental health and well-being are foundational to high performance. You cannot find an elite athlete anywhere who doesn't get this. But the narrative of, hey, I've got to get good sleep and nutrition doesn't go as well as I got to play hurt in the playoffs, right? But when you look at the most successful athletes, these superstars, guys like, you know, Tom Brady, and don't get me wrong, I don't like Tom Brady. He always beats my teams, but you have to admire somebody who's 44 years old who still can compete with 20-year-olds. How does he do it? It's not that he pushes through. It's not that he plays injured. It's not that he sacrifices his mind or his body. He's got an incredibly solid wellness plan that he practices and does not deviate from and it works for him, right? So quick show of hands. How many of you, yes or no, throw it in the chat feature, have prioritized the performance bucket and tend to neglect the well-being bucket? Yes or no? Regularly? Sure. To an extent, yes. No. Good work. Definitely yes. Yes. All right. Sometimes. Sort of yes. Yes. I like that there's mixed responses on this. That's excellent. All right. Even though I teach this stuff, I get it wrong. Especially now that I'm traveling again. I forgot how much energy live events are. You know, you leave the house, you get on a car, you go to the airport, you fly for all day long to go to Toronto or Montreal, or the States is even worse. You know, then you get bad sleep in a hotel. Maybe you don't eat right. And then you got to get up and, you know, you're in front of 1,000 people or 20 people, or whatever it is that you're doing. From the McKenzie group, a large percentage do very often. Yeah. Right. This was the biggest mistake that I made. And, you know, on that when this picture was taken, it's one of the most celebrated images in the Push for Change. It's actually on the book that you're going to get. And the funny thing about this image is that it screams performance, but nobody has ever asked me, no reporter ever asked me what was going on mentally and physically for me that day. And on this day, the campaign almost came to a screeching halt, and I had to reach out and ask for help. And in that moment, that's when Sean got me to do that exercise I shared with you earlier. What are 3 things that you can stop doing today that are energy demands in your work? And what are 3 things that you can do today to increase recovery and things that'll recharge your body, help you decompress, right? But it's just that, you know, that example that, you know, I thought that I could keep going, but I couldn't. And it wasn't until I got these pieces ordered right and I started to take better care of my recovery component instead of my output. Had I not done that, I guarantee I would have not made it to Vancouver. If Sean wasn't there to sort of be that that coach or that whisperer in my ear, I wouldn't. What was your recovery component and what changed? So what changed for me was, thanks for the question, Mark. What changed for me was sleep. I began to reclaim 15 minutes of sleep over a 2.5-month period so that I was getting an appropriate amount of sleep. 2, there were certain pieces of the campaign I kept sticking my nose into because I'm a perpetual control freak. And I stopped doing that, and I let the team do what they were hired to do, right? So I stopped micromanaging certain pieces. It just became none of my business. And 3, I had to delegate. Exactly. I had to. There was a process of ice baths, stretching, and feet up time that I had to do. So while I was making a mistake of finishing the walk and then walking around and not actually getting blood flow to my legs. So that was more of a physical thing. But those were some of the big ones, but there were a number of pieces that we sort of began bolting. That was the starting point, but we bolted on more stuff as the campaign moved forward. You know, what's ironic is through the entire build up from 2012 to the launch in 2016, Sean would constantly say to me, you got to do this stuff. You got to do that. And I would say to him, yeah. And ignored him until I couldn't ignore him anymore. All right. So what happened after that is I became very self-aware of where I was on this continuum. And this is a great tool that I now want to introduce and share with you. Having a tool that allowed me at any given moment in the day, and I still even use this today, to know where am I in 5 stages on the energy health performance continuum. So stage 1 is you're dealing with burnout, mental health conditions. Maybe you're having trouble sleeping. Maybe you're anxious. Maybe you're lethargic. You're burnt out. You've lost all your vitality. That's stage 1. Or maybe even more serious. This is where we're going to start to see sort of cracks in mental health and wellness, anxiety, panic attacks, depression. Right. So there's a real low end on this stage and a higher. And if you notice, there's arrows, right? So you could be really, really severe where you might even need hospitalization or care, or you could be at the top end of that where you're burnt out, but you're still functioning somewhat. Stage 2 is you're managing your energy. You're not thriving, but you're not drowning. You're kind of getting by. You're a day-to-day, right? Stage 3 is you've habitualized your energy health, right? You got really rock solid patterns. Maybe you've had a bout with this before and you've decided to do things differently. And no matter what's going on around you today, you seem to have some really good patterns. You've got some really good rituals that you practice, and you're able to handle the onslaught, the change, and the chaos and challenge that is our new normal, right? When we work with teams deeper, we're trying to get everyone to a stage 3 as a base camp, right? Stage 3 is sort of normal. If you're at stage 3, you've got pockets of peace and contentment back in your life. You feel rested. You're not drowning, right? Stage 4 and 5 are completely optional. These are stages for people who want to sort of invite more, do more, or reach for more, right? This is where you get into intentional building resilience, which is stage 4. This is why people sign up for Ironman races or marathons or more volunteer work or stuff in their community, right? Because they want to push themselves. They want to do more, experience more. And in that process, they intentionally build resilience. Not that you're not, building resilience in stage 1 through 3, you are, but it's a different kind of thing that happens when you invite it. And then stage 5 is you're absolutely maximizing your potential. You're firing on all cylinders. You got a rock solid plan, and you're squeezing every last ounce of performance out of your life. Just something interesting about stage 5. I've been there. It's hard to stay there. It's elite, and I've done a few races and a couple of things, but I'll go up, I'll perform at 5, and then I'll go back to 4 or 3, right? So based on this very simple continuum, where would you say you are today? Are you a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, or stage 5? Throw that in the chat for me. Fluctuate between 2 and 3. 1, working towards 2, 2 or 3, 1, 2 or 3. What's interesting too is you can move up and down. You can start your day in a 3, and by lunch you could be down in a 2, or you could start your week at a 3 or a 4, and by Thursday, you're down in a 2 or a top 1. We got 1, 2, 3, back and forth between 1 and 2, 1, 2 to 4, depending on the week. Yeah, 2, hoping to improve. Depends on the day, average 3. 1, 4, 3, 4. Starting on a 5, on a grueling multi-day hike, end on a 1, LOL. Yeah, and that's kind of how it goes, right? Or a long weekend. You finish a long weekend, it's like, boom, you're a 4 or a 5 heading into Tuesday. By Thursday, you're down in a 2, right? 1 to 3. 3 times, we got 2 people, 3 people at 2. We got 2 people at 3. Okay. So ultimately where we want to get to is having you try to find that base camp at habitualizing energy health. So I'm going to give you some work to do. I just want to go over quickly stress and recovery and just kind of talk quickly to this, and then do the stress recovery wheel, and then we're gonna take a look at some of the worksheets, and I'll give you some homework. So I want to talk just briefly to stress and recovery. And again, this is probably not new information for you, but we use the word stress in our lexicon in a negative way. She stressed me out, that stressed me out, that was a stressful work day. And we tend to call it, we tend to labelize it as positive or negative. Stress, for the sake of the energy health performance continuum conversation, is simply energy out. You can have positive or negative stress, but the mind adds that. All that stress is, does it take, does it deplete your battery? Think about it. You could go to your grandchild's birthday party, and that's stressful, and your battery goes down. It's not a bad thing, but your battery still goes down. I don't know if any of you can identify this, but when you started going back to live events, meeting people again, I found myself at the end of the day exhausted because I just wasn't, so used to that, right? So here's what we know about stress. And again, no new information here. Stress stimulates adaptation and growth. We know in pro sports, we've had 40 years to analyze this because there's so much money in pro sport, that when we place our bodies under stress, we do our exercise and recover, we adapt and grow. Here's what's interesting. Going back to the classroom was exhausting and also energizing. Yes, love it. But I went to a live conference with 1,000 people in Georgia, and it was like, and afterwards I was just absolutely, well, first of all, I have to tell you something funny. I'm introverted. So being around people is like, oh, so energy demanding. I love it, but I end up crashing in the hotel. And I realized I missed this, but at the same time, that took a lot of work. Okay, back to this stress recovery and adaptation. If you've ever done exercise that you haven't done for a while, a hike, a bike, a run, you know what it feels like the next day and the next day. And that's because it's not the exercise that makes you stronger, right? Your muscles and cells are actually being ripped apart. If you go for a big hike or a run, or you do something you haven't done for a while, you go to the gym, you lift some weight, because you get that delayed onset muscle soreness, because at a micro level, you've actually ripped those muscles. So going to the gym doesn't make you stronger. It's the recovery that makes you stronger, right? It's the energy in, right? It's the rest, the nutrition, the stretching, the time in between that kind of workout, right? So the exercise weakens and the recovery strengthens, right? So how many times have you found yourself in the last year feeling guilty about taking time off, or feeling guilty about taking downtime? You would never go out and do, a big run and then do it the next day and do it the next day and do it. Like, we don't do that to ourselves physically, but we do that to ourselves mentally. We do that to ourselves emotionally. We do that to ourselves physically in other areas, right? So if stress recovery and adaptation works for fitness, well, it works for other areas in our lives too. And one of the things that Sean discovered in his PhD, having interviewed over 170 of the top athletes all around the world, is that stress comes in multiple different flavors and varieties. Yes, of course, there's the sleep and the physical and the nutrition, which is the physical. And in pro sport, they focus a lot on that, although now we're starting to have more of a conversation about mental health. But what he found interesting is that there was a certain bunch of athletes who were favored to win their respective sports and their gold medals, and they didn't. And he became very curious as a scientist. He said, well, why? Well, here's what he discovered, is that there were multiple kinds of stress and demands in some of these athletes' lives that were related to social, that were related to environment, that were related to mental and emotional. Now, to play at that level, you have to be your physical best. So the physical stuff usually wasn't where the problem was. It was social, relationships, environments. You just think about your life over the last 2 years. Has there been greater energy demands because of social engagement or disconnection, right? Or what about your environment? Have you had to work remotely? Or just having to deal with all the masking and all of that stuff? Screen time is also can be depleting. Artificial lighting, air conditioning, driving in the snow to work. These are environmental things that are stimuli that drain us of energy. Mentally, emotionally, how has your work been more demanding? And then, of course, physically, what do you eat? Hydration, sleep, move your body, right? So, look, if you're an athlete and you need recovery for you to adapt and grow and become stronger, more resilient, then you need to balance these other areas in your life. And that's basically what Sean sort of figured out, which is that in order for some of these athletes who were falling short and seeing greater energy depletions, is they needed to come up with strategies for better recovery in these other areas. So he adapted and created this thing called the stress recovery wheel. And it simply looks like, how do we take and balance the 5 energy demands out with energy back in, right? So I want to actually jump in and do some work right now. So in the handout sheets that I gave you, there's a sheet that looks like this, and it's an energy demand inventory. And what we're going to do just quickly is, because we are coming close to the hour, is I want you to go through on the social and go back to that brainstorming session that we talked about. What are some of the things that you can do to balance your energy workday demands in recovery related to social. So some of the ones that I have, I'll give you some examples. Connecting with a friend for coffee, you know, trying to do something unexpected for someone else, connecting with a colleague and maybe talking about a problem. What are some of the things that you can do socially that actually help you re-energize, or help you recharge your battery? Give me some ideas in the chat feature. I think if we were to go back up and look inside the chat when we asked this question before, what did we have here? Because I asked this question earlier on brainstorming, what are some of the things that you do? Here we are. Take a hike with a friend. Take a few quiet minutes to yourself and breathe after a large social interaction. You know, that's a really great example, Andrea. We get energy when we socially disconnect as well as when we connect. So sometimes getting social energy is getting time off, especially if you have small children. Sometimes that 10 minutes just by yourself listening to soothing music. Healthy boundaries on time. A supervisor I greatly respect noted how some would recharge with social contact, others would recharge better without it. Yes, I find myself the latter circumstances. It's why I run. As an introvert, I avoid non-essential social stuff because it does, you know, it does drain my battery. Starting to socialize again, time out with nature, write, talk. Okay, what about environment? Sensory. What are some things that you can do to get recovery from some of the environmental stimulus? Maybe break from your computer, walk outside. Some of these things have already been mentioned. Fresh air. One of the things we talk about in that micro break is getting out, getting some fresh air. Maybe walk to work, bike to work. Take your lunch outside at a picnic table if possible. Turn off the news. Oh, amen. I stopped watching the news. It's just not, I can read a few blogs and figure out what's going on in the world. There just seems to be so, especially if you're empathic. I find when I watch the news is I absorb so much of the negativity. Cut the lawn on your lunch hour. If the rain would stop. Yeah, we got some rain here too. Take a break from social media. Oh, that's beautiful. I love it. Listen to music. Okay, what about mental? What are some of the things that you can do mentally? I never really did well with meditation. Well, actually, it's because I never practiced it or stuck with it. But I listened to a song by Marconi Union. It's a song I can listen to for 8 minutes, and it's actually designed to settle my brain waves. Right? Listen to music, meditate, yoga. Yeah. What else do we have? What are some examples on the sheet? Listen to relaxing music on the commute. 20 minutes with the phone off. A fun, enjoyable, funny movie or comedy. What do we got here? Journaling. Insight timer. Had a lot of, you know, that's really great. There are so many great little free apps out there that you can use. Deep breathing, timeout apps, quantum healing. Obey my Apple Watch and practice a minute of mindfulness. Yeah, that's the cool thing about the technology is we can use it to our benefit, right? Okay, let's talk a little bit about social. What are some things that you can do to recover and recharge socially? So some of the examples I have: morning coffee with a friend, an activity that may be opposite to one that normally does. I work at a desk job and lots of social interaction. I spend my last vacation building a patio set from scratch and listening to interview podcasts. There you go. Yeah, perfect. Seek out support groups. Yeah, on the mental and emotional stuff, support groups or faith. And, you know, I talked to a lot of people and they're like, well, you know, I'm involved in my church or I'm involved in my, you know, my spiritual development. And these are things that you can do to plug in. By the way, you can cross pollinate. So you can do something socially that's also environmentally, a walk with a friend, talking about your problems or talking about some higher things. And you can actually be ticking all 5 categories with 1 or 2 activities. Prayer, absolutely. Healthy relationships, friends, limit unhealthy friends. Yeah. And then lastly, on the emotional stuff, did we get through that? Yeah, on the emotional stuff, to talk to a friend, therapy. You know, I'm still involved in a recovery community. I go to meetings. I have people that I support. I have people that I go to for support. Also, on some of that mental and emotional stuff, sometimes there's the need to go a little step further. I carried around a lot of stuff for a lot of years, you know, full transparency here. When I went and actually sat and did knee to knee work with a professional, I was able to unpack some of that those really big, ugly things that were traumatic. And when I got rid of that, the weight and the amount of energy that I was sucking out of my life every day, every year, whatever, was gone. So, you know, sometimes getting a chance to actually do some of that deeper work. What else we got? Give back. I love it. Volunteer. Yes. For mental, give my mind a break for doing tasks that's mindless. A gratitude journal. Love it. Yes. Gratitude lists are helpful. And then lastly, physical. What are some things that you can do? During the lockdown, when I had no one, you know, I had no work to do for 6 months, and then the phone started ringing again. But I actually trained and completed an Ironman. Maybe a little obsessive compulsive over here, but exercise to me is my go-to. Good nutrition, good exercise. I cannot, bond elliptical, swim, hike, sport. By the way, if you're out of sync with that, that's okay. That's normal. It's where you're at. And you don't have to, I'm not advocating you become an endurance athlete, just do something. You know, if you've got mobility issues, you know, look for a way where you can find a sport that's inclusive, you know, that invites you, that you can participate in. We can, dance with my kids, swim, walk, hike, roller skating, dance. Puts me in. So this is actually a really good start. I want to wrap things up. So I want to leave you with some homework. If you notice the first part of this exercise we didn't do, which is identifying our workday energy demands. What are the big things that you're doing right now that you could delegate, delay, or drop? Find the ones that are the biggest offenders in the social, environmental, mental, emotional, and physical, and see what you can do. Maybe you can't do anything, but you can do the recovery stuff. The next is to take a look at what are some possible helpful responses to your greatest offenders. And you don't have to do this all at once, but take a look at those ones that really are glaring for you. Is it sleep? Is it coffee? Is it wine? Is it disengaging on Netflix? Whatever it is. And then slowly try to reclaim some of that back. I talked about the power of micro breaks. There's one thing that you want to pick up and do. It's this. Every 75 to 90 minutes, give yourself adult resets. It's only 5 minutes. If you're in front of a computer, close the computer. If you know, let things settle. You know, Microsoft determined they did an EEG study of their team, a group of team down in Washington, who were on video calls, and the ones who were going from video call to video call to video call showed all of these. I think it was beta gamma, something that basically was a predeterminant of stress. And from this study, they instituted a mandatory break in between video calls. When we have stressful, intense encounters, we need the time to defrag. Right? Micro breaks are something you can schedule them. Right? So this is included in your handout. These are just some ideas. You know, there's a bunch for each category. Possible recovery activities, and then we included this, which is possible disruptors. What are some of the things that you want to avoid? And you're going to look through this, and maybe yours aren't on here, but figure out which ones are the biggest disruptors in your life. So I would highly recommend you spend some time outside of this session on this. Do it with a buddy. Just to summarize what I shared with you over the last hour is that when stress and energy goes up, our recovery often goes down. And what's created in between is this energy gap. And if the energy gap stays for too long a period of time, we can find ourselves in stage 1 burnout. The good news is we can look at ways to decrease stress, decrease workload, delay, delegate, drop, get rid of some of the workload. And we can absolutely do things to do recovery with intention. And when we do that, we can close that energy gap and we can get back to a sense of semblance. So for those of you who are reporting in at, like a 0 or a 1 or a 2, there's hope. You can get to this place where you're simply doing some small things with intention. And over time, if you stick with it, you'll get to that stage 3 in the continuum, right? It's not about avoiding hard work. Hard work is with us to stay. It's about if we're going to work hard, we need to recover harder. It's that simple. So your next action steps are to pick up and take a harder look at some of these. Do a little bit more time on those workbooks. The last thing I'll leave you with, a couple things, is do it with a friend, do it with a buddy, gamify it, do it as a team. If you've got a health and wellness group, bring it together. I've got a resource that I can share with you called the 10-day challenge, and I'll make sure that you get that. Accountability with other people is, especially if it's something that you've struggled with. I have a friend that I jog with on Sunday. Sometimes I don't want to jog on Sunday, but I show up because I was committed to him, right? And then just, saying with intention, this is what I'm going to do this week or for the next 2 days or 3 days, and then checking in with a friend. Last thing I'll share with you is a book by James Clear. It's right here. One of the most important books that I read last year. Excellent book, How to Build Atomic Habits. It's very simple and straightforward, and it can show you how to, a step-by-step in putting, and building really great habits. Look, at the end of the day, we're going to continue to face storms, challenges, right? It's not necessarily going to get better. That's bad news. The good news is we can. After this picture, after 9 months, when it almost all came sort of folding in on me, it's not like the weather got better or the hills got lighter, but by taking care of the things that were important to my recovery, I was able to be better in the midst of all that chaos, that challenge, and that adversity. I want to thank you very much for your attendance, being here today. That's how you can connect with me, skidrowceo.com. Find me on LinkedIn and connect with me. That's my personal email address. I'll put it again in the chat. You're getting a copy of the book. Please have a read. It's really inspiring. It's got more than I shared today. It's fantastic. Share it with someone who needs encouragement. And the last thing I'll share with you is that we have something called the 10-day recovery challenge. It's absolutely free for you to use. It's got supportive videos. So if you're interested in really picking this stuff up and running with it, I'm going to send all that information over to Jane, and she can send it out to you. That's my time. Thanks very much for partaking and participating today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Lastly, if there's anything you want to bounce off me personally, you want to reach out to me, I'm available free of charge. Just send us an email. So thanks very much. Namaste.
Thank you so much, Joe. We really appreciate both your sessions yesterday and today. And again,